So it's an honor to be here, and I'm really, really excited. I'm looking forward to have the chance to interview you. While I was preparing for this interview, I did a little bit of research, and I found out that they used to call you Joebot at Airbnb.
Yeah, Joebot like the robot, yeah. Why? So when I joined Airbnb, it was a 3-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. When you entered the apartment, you took your shoes off, which I thought was very strange for a corporate environment. Like to enter, you take your shoes off. And I joined, and in 1 bedroom was the product team. It was 3 founders, 3 engineers. I was the 3rd engineer. And in the living room was the customer support team. But in the bedroom, the product team, there were 6 people, but there were 2 Joes. Because Joe Zadeh was one of the founders of Airbnb. And so we had this big problem, which was there's 2 Joes, what do we do? So my social media handle was like Joebot, which has no real meaning, but it became my nickname. And for the next 10 years, that's what everybody referred to me as. Like no last name, nothing, just Joebot.
And how was it like in those very early days at Airbnb? Like, what was the atmosphere in that apartment?
Yeah, the energy was amazing. I remember entering. Take your shoes off. You enter, and the apartment was beautiful. It was well designed. 2 of the 3 founders of Airbnb are designers, and so it was just really nice aesthetic. But it all just felt like a lot of optimism, positivity. We're going to make a big difference in the world. We're going to change the world, the whole Silicon Valley saying. And you really felt it. And it was just very exciting, and people were really friendly. And what's interesting is that as we got bigger, we really invested in that culture and keeping that culture. And when we moved to 20, 30 offices around the world, I believe we have one in Milan as well, you enter those offices and you still have that same kind of feel, that same kind of energy. And so I think that was a real big draw for me to join the company. It felt really exciting. It felt really good. It felt different. It was cool to take your shoes off and just be kind of casual and then go build fun stuff.
That's great. I'm always endlessly fascinated by processes and mental and organizational frameworks also. So how did you identify good opportunities at Airbnb? Like, if we take, for example, Airbnb Experiences, right, that you led for so long, what was the process behind, going from idea to, really start working into it and then launching into the market?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing to first explain is, not everyone's familiar with Airbnb Experiences. It's Airbnb's second business, tours and activities. My family is on a personal shopping tour of Milan today, where they kind of style you up and figure out what you should be wearing. My American family is eating it up; they love it. And but how did we decide to do that? The decision to even move in that direction probably started in 2011. So in 2010, I joined the company. In 2011, we said, hey, the homes thing is going pretty well. What's next for Airbnb? And we sat around, the founders and a few of us, and we had some conversations about, well, should Airbnb get into car sharing? Should we share all kinds of things? Like, I was excited about people sharing drills, when you drill something into the wall, because a drill gets about 13 minutes of use in its entire life, yet everybody in this room probably owns their own drill. And so we debated it, and my boss, Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, he went home for a vacation during the Christmas holidays, and he reread Walt Disney's biography. And, the creation, part of the biography talks about the creation of the movie Snow White, which was groundbreaking in the 1930s. It was the first full-length animated feature, and it was about the way they made it was they created a storyboard where they would storyboard every part of the film so that the story, like the animators and the storytellers, and the voice actors, they'd all be on the same page about what the story was. And he thought, well, why don't we do that around travel? Let's have a storyboard of every single step of the trip, from when you plan your trip, when you leave your house, when you get there, when you check in to your Airbnb, when you get a taxi, when you get do an activity, do dinner, when you leave. And we realized that the Airbnb was playing only a very small part in that entire story. And so the idea was, why doesn't Airbnb start to provide the whole story, the whole trip? And we thought about this for years, and that was our plan, to get into more and more of the trip. And we spent about 2 years developing a lot of new verticals of travel on Airbnb, especially Airbnb Experiences. We launched it in 2016 in Los Angeles, and then it started in 12 cities, and then shortly after, I took over as the head of the business unit, and then we focused on scaling it out to about 1,000 cities. And I think there's probably even more at this point.
And what was the decision-making process that went into it? Like, did you lock yourself in a room with Brian Chesky and did you draw on wall, etc.? So, what is the decision-making process looking like? And consequently, how do you set a goal, for the entire organization?
Yeah. So the decision process for experiences, that's a very big. Like your next business is a very big strategic decision for the company, and that is one that really has to lots of opinions have to be considered, but that's one that the CEO has to make. And so pretty early on we knew that no, we're not going to get into car sharing, and no, we're not going to start sharing drills and tools and stuff. We're going to start focusing on more parts of the trip, and then there was a lot of pilots of new ideas. And then you look at the new ideas and you kind of see what's working, what's resonating. And so you're collecting data as you go along, validating, just like you would a startup. It's like a startup within a startup. In fact, we had many startups inside of Airbnb trying ideas. And then, why we landed on experiences being the main one is that it was one that really resonated with what Airbnb was good at. Airbnb was really good at human-to-human interaction, was really good at, human-provided hospitality. Experiences felt like a natural extension. We had seen our hosts already do it. So by that point, it became a bit more obvious, and so it didn't require a lot of debate, and we also believed there was a really big market for it. And so that was not a difficult decision. In terms of how you set goals, that kept changing as we got bigger. When we were small, 10 people in an apartment, I don't think we had concrete goals. We just knew we had to grow. But when you're running a large business, like our homes business, of course you have really crisp, clear ideas, forecasts. And then of course, new startups within the company, once again, you have to kind of be a little bit more fluid because it's really hard to predict how things go. So it really depends on the scale of business. Like if it's a small business, lots of unknowns, the goals are more flexible. And if it's a very established business, the goals are more clear and predictable.
Yeah, makes sense. And so all of a sudden, or not so all of a sudden, but you are the head of this new business unit, the Airbnb Experience, and you have to build it up from scratch. So how did you organize your unit, your department?
Yeah, it was an interesting time for Airbnb because up until that point, Airbnb was organized functionally. So up to that point, I was the head of product management. So I would manage the function of product management. And then I had a partner who was the head of engineering, and the VP of engineering, and he managed all the engineers. And we had a head of design, and we called it, I called it like the Triforce, like from Zelda. I don't know if that translates. But the three-headed beast of product engineering and design. And of course, data science also was in there, and research as well. And what happened is we started moving to a business unit structure where instead of all engineers reporting to one head of engineering, we moved to a place where me as the business unit leader of Airbnb Experiences, I had engineers reporting into me, product managers reporting into me, designers reporting into me, almost everything except for control functions like finance or legal, which usually stay very centralized. And so companies will go through these waves as they get bigger. They might split into business units at some point. They may move back into functional every couple of years based on what the company needs.
And how many people did you have reporting directly to you, for example?
Like direct reports?
Yeah.
Just people that directly report to me. I try to usually keep it around 7 plus or minus 2. So somewhere between 5 and 9. Usually if you go over 9, it's really hard. So it also depends on the function. For product management, I think 7 plus or minus 2 is a good number. If you have less than 5, then maybe you don't need an extra manager, so you can keep the company more flat. And if you have more than 9, chances are you don't have time to really help develop those people and spend time with them. I think on engineering, depending on the type of engineering, you could go much bigger. But I think in the product management function, that's kind of what I would aim for.
And so maybe you could share with us, since you led such a large business unit and organization, what were your lessons basically learned in leadership, and maybe how did your style of leadership evolve over time as a result of your learnings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I was a PhD student before joining Airbnb, and PhD students are like the epitome of individual contributor. You're an extreme individual contributor. And then all of a sudden I'm on Airbnb, and then very quickly I have, was head of product, and, I have managing for the first time. And then I'm, with product managers, I may not have been directly managing the engineers, but our team was managing a lot of the work. And so in my purview, all of a sudden I have, a large number of people to manage with no, actual management experience. And so I had to learn very, very quickly. I definitely didn't get it all right. And I was very lucky that I had really good mentors and coaches to sort of help teach me. And there's one lesson that stands out, and this was that a coach taught me. And, he told me the way you manage yourself is how you manage others. And it's very obvious now hearing that, but I don't think I fully understood that when entering management. And by managing yourself, it's like, how do you manage your time? Like, are you overly self-critical? Do you have good balance in your life? How do you talk to yourself? Which kind of sounds silly, but what's the way in which you engage with yourself? And, for me, I'm someone who pushes myself to achieve, is extremely hard on myself, works really hard. And, what I started to see was that was showing up in how I would manage others as well. I would also, for example, not be super balanced in terms of making room for being healthy, making room for exercise. And then all of a sudden I see, not sleeping enough, all of a sudden I see the people I'm managing, they're not sleeping well either. And so I think I've learned as a manager, one of the best things you can do is to really make sure you take care of yourself first, because that's just going to make you a much better manager and a much better leader. And, as I said, it sounds obvious, but a lot of us don't really do that.
And do you have any particular tactic or technique in this area that worked well for you that you think could be applied more broadly?
Yeah, one lesson from this is, if I looked at my schedule, for a lot of my tenure at Airbnb, before I had this realization, you look at my schedule and it's like you get in the office at 8:30 and it's just nonstop meetings until 7 p.m. at night. There's no room for lunch. And I think that a lot of people would call that time management. Like, how do I get as many meetings as possible into my day so I can get as much stuff done as possible. And every meeting and everything I do feels like I'm getting more stuff done. And I started to realize over time that we should stop thinking about time management and we should start thinking about energy management. In other words, how do I maximize my energy at all times? Which might mean, no, I don't go to work at, being the first person in the office. Maybe I go work out first because that will give me energy and that will help me be my best for the next meeting. Or maybe these recurring meetings I'm having aren't really necessary, or they're draining everybody and they're bad for the energy of the team. Maybe we need to remove that. Maybe I need to get home at 6 and see my kids to bed because it makes me happy. And then, I'm going to be a much better leader and manager if that need is met. And so I think I encourage people in their professional lives, maybe even their personal lives, to stop thinking about how to get more meetings in, but think more about how to maximize their energy. And for some people, it's maybe taking on a new role, and for other people, it could even be, hey, that's not the right company for you. It's a company that might take away your energy. And so I think thinking about energy, in other words, how you spend your time, is more important than maximizing your time.
Yeah. And do you remember how your agenda looked like back then? Yeah.
I think I mostly described it. It's really trying to get as many things in a day as possible, and it was also a little challenging because sometimes the reason I'd have to be at work, sometimes even as early as like 7, which is for Silicon Valley is pretty early, is we were a very international company, and some of my direct reports were not based in the United States. Some were based in Europe. I think I had some based in Asia at some point, and so you want to make sure you also can meet people in their time zone and not necessarily just only be, Airbnb was truly an international company from the start. What we sell is travel around the world, and we were trying very hard not to only have an American mindset, which means that you need to be flexible to meet people in their schedule. So, but it was fairly busy, but every single hour. But as I maybe got more experienced, I learned to keep a lot more flexibility in my schedule. I would review my schedule with my EA every day, and just find ways to say, okay, can this meeting be an email? Can we free up 2 hours to have more ad hoc communication? Can I just walk around the office and talk to people, or if they weren't in the office, on Slack, and just like have quick interactions as opposed to like formal meetings?
And how did you communicate on one side with your team, but also on the other side with your stakeholders?
Yeah, I think there's communication takes place in many forms. One of the most important principle, I think, for communication, actually I think the most important principle for product management overall is simplicity. Is like focus and simplicity. And simplicity is a virtuous cycle, meaning that the more you simplify, the easier things get. On the other hand, complexity is a vicious cycle, meaning that complexity creates more complexity, creates more complexity. And so I tried to make sure that when we create strategies, they were very simple. They could fit into half a page, a couple bullets, and were very repetitive, very memorable. In every meeting, people remembered it. Everybody remembered it. We always start every all hands reviewing our strategy. It's very simple. It's very easy to understand. And then so that principle would permeate all my communication, even my emails. Once a week I would do a long newsletter-like email, but other than that, I try to keep my emails very short, very, very simple, not to ask too much at once. And I find that if I find myself spending an hour on an email, then I'm probably not ready to write that email. Like, it's probably too much stuff that's unclear, and maybe it's just too complicated. And so I try to just always simplify, and you'll probably hear me say this 3 more times today, but like just every aspect of the product life, like how people communicate, the product itself, the strategy, the goals, everything, just constantly, continuously simplifying.
And did you have any particular process before a meeting, even like a huge one, when, for example, you announce in front of an audience, like a huge release or doing an online or something?
Yeah, it really just depended on the meeting. So what I would try to do is, if we had certain documents like metric tracking, like our OKRs, instead of we would have a check-in meeting around that document. We would try not to create new documents. Once again, don't create more complexity. And so, in some ways, the metric tracking document or dashboard and the meeting became the same thing, where you didn't have to create more places for people to look for the information. Just, as I said, simplify. If it's an all hands, one of the things we started doing was really distributing the work of an all hands to most of the team. So it's not just on me or my direct reports to put together content, share content, but really empower the team to really help own the meeting, and I just help MC it. So we always just try to find ways to distribute the work, make it simple, make it easy. But it's hard to like have like one process that works for every meeting. I think the most important thing is like, how do we have less meetings? I think that was like, and I think that's a difficult one for product management because as an engineer or designer, you have tangible work, and product, like you're like the conductor of an orchestra. The work is a lot less tangible, and so sometimes meetings feel like the work, but ultimately, when I was an engineer at Airbnb, I never had any meetings. I was just working on coding, and I think the real process I would challenge you all as product managers is how to have as few meetings as possible.
That's a challenge.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
Looking back at your time in the company, what would you say were the most crucial moments for each stage as the company grew, and what do you think were the elements that allow you to push through and perform optimally?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting so Airbnb, while I was there, especially running product, was continuously in hypergrowth, which was really great. The company was just continuously growing fast. But hypergrowth for the company means hypergrowth, or requires hypergrowth of its employees. And so I was constantly, and Brian used to say something, which was, for every 6 months you kept your job in a hypergrowth company, you were effectively being promoted. Even if like the aspects of your job didn't change, the title or whatever didn't change, you were doing a job that was significantly harder than it was 6 months before. And so I think the most important thing that's required in hypergrowth is the ability to adapt very, very quickly to change, and know that for processes, if I run a meeting one way with a certain kind of like metric dashboard or document, 6 months from now, it might feel wrong, even if it feels great today. And it's also one of the things that makes hiring very difficult, is that by the time you know what you need, you're kind of past that growth point, you don't have that person, and then it takes 6 more months to find that person, and then by the time that person joins, the problems are already harder than when you wanted to hire. And so you had to also get really good at kind of knowing, like my rule of thumb was to hire for what I would need 2 years from now. So if we knew that, for example, we needed to have product managers that could manage 5 or 6 PMs, they might come in as an individual contributor, but we wanted to know that they've already proven themselves to manage 5 or 6 product managers, because we believe in 2 years, that's the job they're going to have. Otherwise, we're constantly playing catch up. So just kind of hiring 2 years ahead became sort of one of the mantras in terms of hiring.
And how did you identify which role, because it was so far ahead, how did you identify which role, you were going to need, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always had flexibility and always expected that people every couple years will change roles. So we looked for, there were cases where we would look for like very specialist product managers. So when you're talking about, deep technical infrastructure, that requires a certain kind of product manager that's not, chances are you're not going to go put in like something very user-facing under most scenarios, and vice versa. So there is some level of like, okay, we need a bit more technical product management expertise. We need a bit more, we might be doing fine on user-facing product management expertise. But besides that, for most part, when I was running it, we still looked for generalists. We didn't really hire too many specialists. And if it was a specialist, it was a very large area like growth. People had experience with things like SEO or email or push notifications, or as I said, technical. And then we tried to like really develop people to take on new roles. And there'd be cases where people completely switch areas. And then we also later on got better at even identifying talent, non-product management talent in the company, like in finance, for example, and then bringing them over to product.
What would you say are the elements that allow Airbnb to be so successful, and to explode on such a global scale?
Yeah, I think that if you look at the early days of Airbnb, and this is this comes up a lot for me when I invest in companies. The Airbnb product in 2010, 2011 was not just a little better than the alternatives. It was like 10 times better than the alternatives. You could get a hotel, you can get an Airbnb that was half the price of a hotel, and it was 4 times the space, and you had a local, and it was located not in the traditional tourist areas, and it was bringing tourism dollars to other places that don't get it. And it was better in almost every possible way in terms of the customer experience. And when you're trying to create a new market or create a radically different product, you can't just be 10% better. You have to be 10 times better. And I think that Airbnb did that, and that at its core made it something that people want to talk about. And also it was inherently controversial. People were like, wait, so you're going to go stay in a stranger's house? Why would you do that? And it made it, people were talking about it. And also people talk about travel. After the holidays, you go into the office, and all you do is you talk about what you did. Oh, I had this amazing Airbnb. Oh, what's Airbnb? And so I think it was a really radically better product that, the best next thing was Craigslist, which I don't know if it exists so much in Italy, but it's very almost very bare bones classified. And I think what also helped was that we had to build a lot of trust very quickly with consumers. And I think having 2 designer founders helped a lot, because you can design the platform for trust, and you can design it to feel safer, you can design it to be safer. For example, one of the first projects I had as an engineer, we didn't have product managers, so I was the engineer and product manager of it, was to build professional photography. So in the early days, we would send a free professional photographer into almost every host's home, take beautiful photos of the listing, and it would elevate the whole brand and look and feel and trustworthiness of the product. And so that kind of stuff pervaded through the entire time I was at Airbnb. I think still exists today, just constantly designing, iterating, thinking about from the customer's perspective, how do we continuously make this better and better and more differentiated?
That's on a company level, right?
Yeah.
Instead of a personal level, what do you think are character traits that you need to develop in order to achieve such a high level of success?
So when I hired product managers, we asked a lot of people. We had interviews that would look for the technical requirements for the job. For the first 70 product managers, I interviewed every final stage candidate, and I really felt strongly about that. And I would assume that by the time that I was interviewing them, the technical stuff was vetted. The 2 things I would look into with a candidate would be, do they love product? Do they love to build things? There are a lot of people who get into product management because they're more interested on the business aspect of it, or only interested in the business aspect of it. The business part is very important. It's exciting. Product managers need to know it. But I fundamentally wanted to hire people that when you gave them a beautiful product, they lit up and they loved it and they got curious and they asked all kinds of questions. And so I would try to understand what kinds of products do they love, what makes them really excited. If they didn't have great answers to that question, then it was hard for me to see them being successful in our organization. The other question I would ask them, or set of questions I would ask, would try to get at this concept of growth mindset, which nearby in Silicon Valley at Stanford, a researcher or scientist created, which is basically how do you deal with failure and setbacks. When you make a mistake, do you, if you give two kids a puzzle, one kid might say, oh, the puzzle's hard, and give up and throw it on the ground and walk away. And that's called a fixed mindset. And another kid might struggle with it, get frustrated, but keep working on it, figure it out, be really excited and want a harder puzzle and wants to get better and better and better. And so almost the most important thing I would look for in a product management, although I would say this is true for any hypergrowth employee, would be this growth mindset. Are you going to get easily frustrated when things aren't working, when things are tough, or are you going to roll up your sleeves and try to fix the problem and make it better and then want a more difficult challenge? And I looking back on it, I'm very proud. One of the things I'm most proud of is that a lot of the folks from my organization have moved on to be head of product elsewhere. And I do think that this was one thing that we nailed really well, was that character trait of this grit and this tenaciousness and this growth mindset.
Awesome. We're fast approaching the end of this interview. I have one more question, and then
Sure.
And then we'll leave the stage to the question from the audience. And this is about product management and Italy, actually. I'd like to have your thoughts around how to attract more international investments and more startups to Italy, and create in general a more product-driven culture in tech.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think I'm not sure if I explained earlier, but I moved to Italy 8 months ago, to Bologna, and I plan to be here for a couple more years. And I've more recently been getting into the Italian tech ecosystem and trying to learn more. And I feel very grateful that the Italian government has given me the permission to stay here for a bit. And so I want to give back to the community in which I'm living in. And the way I know how to do that is by being a mentor, an advisor, an investor in Italian tech. And so I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm still very early in understanding this. But what I've seen so far, only a couple examples, is that the engineering in Italy is very strong. That's my impression so far, is that Italy has extremely strong engineering. But in the tech side, I'm looking for a little stronger sense of product strategy and marketing acumen. And the thing is I know it's in Italy. You have such a long history of some of the most iconic products and iconic brands in other industries. And so I think Italy has all the ingredients for building one of the strongest product cultures in the world. And so I'm very excited about that. In terms of how do we foster this and really bring the Italian tech ecosystem to its full potential and the companies to its full potential, I think there are also other things that we need. I think one, we need a lot. We need to bring in folks who can share learnings from from elsewhere in the world. As I said, I'm very excited to be sharing what I learned in Silicon Valley with almost any startup that wants that help in Italy. But also, I think that we need the government to be also very supportive. And I don't have a sense of how supportive or not supportive the government is of tech. But for example, I've seen in France, a friend of mine is Fred Mazzella, who is the founder of BlaBlaCar. And I met him a long time ago in the Airbnb headquarters, and I've seen his company become the first unicorn in France, or one of the first unicorns in France, and now there are 26. And what I've seen by that is the government really made it a priority to really invest in tech, both from making it incentives, from helping add extra financing and investment into tech companies. So I think government is one component. But also what was really interesting is that, Fred from BlaBlaCar was one of the first heroes for the French ecosystem. And all of a sudden, lots of other startups can say, oh, well, this guy did it. I could do it. And so they have someone to look up to. And then now there are 26 unicorns in France. And so I think all the ingredients are there. I think we have to keep investing on it. We have to keep. I'm hoping that the government will be participating in elevating tech. I think investors, especially European investors, I think I've heard more historically have not been as long-term thinking in terms of their expectations on return. I think investors need to be very long-term in terms of when they want to see a return on their investment and be investing in very long-term companies. And I think if that happens, I'm hoping that and it's starting to happen, a couple really interesting, hero tech companies within Italy emerge, and from that, we have a virtuous cycle where more people get excited, and then it's a nice flywheel, if you will, of more tech. And I think all this can be done within the next 5 to 10 years. And I think all the ingredients are there, and Italy has such an amazing culture for this, so I'm very excited.
So we need more product heroes, basically.
We need more product heroes, yes.
All right, so let's go to the question from the audience. Thanks for submitting, by the way. So what are, in your opinion, the main differences between California, US, and Italy, Europe, in terms of product development? I'm sure you have covered it in the previous answer already, but if you have more to add to this.
Yeah, so when I was running product, product was all basically, the time I was running was basically done in California. So when I had direct reports that were European or Asia or in Asia, they were not necessarily product related. So I had never managed product managers from a different country. What I have seen so far, the skill that it's not that it's a different set of skills. It's just that where product management is what so far I've seen in Italy is just earlier. It's like where product management was in Silicon Valley 10 years ago. And I think the number one skill that I could impart comes back to my word on simplicity. And number one thing I would love to see from more startups that I've talked to in Italy as a sort of proxy for product management would be really crystal clear, simple product strategy. So what do I mean? Which means don't give me a list of the 10 features you're going to do. Give me what is the strategy? What is your approach? What is a simple insight you have on what's going to make your business not only really successful, but extremely differentiated and resonate with customers? I think there's a good book that I tend to give folks developing the skill called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And I don't know if it's translated into Italian or not, but maybe it is. But it's a book that I highly recommend because it does a really good job. It's not product specific by any means, but it does talk about what does a good strategy look like. And I think I haven't seen any sort of problems with execution of getting good engineering work done. But I do sometimes feel we need a better strategy. And so, once again, very early, so I could be wrong in terms of that advice, but that's kind of the area where I think, not only I would recommend to the European product managers, but I also recommend to anyone starting a career in product management.
So, thank you. Question number 2. How do you maintain user experience consistent when you start having business units? Is it all about the design system or what?
Yeah, so this is a very good question. It's a very challenging one. So one of the challenges is as companies get bigger, you have to find new ways to organize. And as a company gets to a certain size, there's no way around it. There's no good org structure. The best org structure I experienced was when Airbnb was 10 people. And we just had customer support in one bedroom and product in a different bedroom, and that was the best. When you are, thousands of people across, 30 offices, there is, you shouldn't waste your time looking for the perfect org structure because they're kind of all bad. None of them are good. And you by definition have to sort of be a matrix. And what this means is also that when you have different business units, what will end up happening under most circumstances is that the product will start mimicking the organizational structure. Like, so why is it like this? Well, that's what the A team wanted to do. Why is it like this? Well, that's what the B team wanted to do. And like, there's no cohesiveness or consistency. So I think to answer this question, I think that what ends up happening is you have to create sort of a central team that kind of owns the customer experience and then feeds it into the different businesses. So, for example, take Amazon. Amazon's a company with many, many, many business units, but they have a few teams that manage the homepage, that manage the overall structure, and they give a lot of tools to the business units to use, and those tools are all sort of, standardized, so it has the same look and feel. Although I wouldn't, necessarily point to Amazon as a good example of great design, but it works very well for them. And all those business units can live together. And I think, how much effort you put into the design of that central team is really critical.